All right, so what we're doing here is I'm going to do a brief little talk about timber, because timber is a vital product in engineering and it's suitable to do it in a workshop. So there's bits of timber to look at while we're doing it. This particular piece here is a nice piece of dressed all around, probably a cedar. No, that's a maple. It's just got a cedary look to it. But anyway, bottom line is we use this in engineering quite a lot. But my question for you to think about is a very simple one, and it's crucial to your understanding of timber as an engineerable or engineer usable product. And it's why is a tree a tree? Why is a tree a tree?
It's like a why didn't we fall through the floor?
It's very much like why didn't we fall through the floor, but not at all like why don't we fall through the floor. That's a question. This is a question. What I'm trying to do is get you to think in a different way entirely and come to a conclusion at the end of it all. Why is a tree a tree?
Living.
For what?
It's living.
For living.
It's
Okay.
living.
It is living, definitely. I'll give you a clue. To make more trees. Obvious, isn't it? Why is a tree a tree? To make more trees. What's its whole purpose in living?
Make more trees.
Make more trees. If it doesn't make more trees, it's not much of a tree. In fact, it's a dead-end tree. It will get one generation, it's it, and end of story. So when we look out there and see trees, we have to accept that those trees are good at doing that. They're better at doing that than other trees that weren't good at doing that. It's logical. Right? Okay. How does it get good at doing that? And why does it have to be good at doing that compared to the trees that aren't good at doing that, that aren't there now because they weren't good at doing that?
Because humans have cut them down?
Well, that could be a reason for stopping them getting to that point where they actually can make more trees. But has it always been like that? Has man always been running around chopping down every tree that he can find? Obviously we weren't good at doing that then because there's trees out there. So if that was us, we failed. They won. Okay. How it does it is it has to simply live long enough to make more trees. And if it lives really long, it may make lots more trees. How does it do that? Where does a tree come from? Seeds. Okay, so somewhere in this process the tree propagates itself through the seeding process. Not all trees work exactly the same on this. There's variations. Ferns don't operate exactly the same. What you think of as a seed, you know, that sort of seed that you see when you look at a packet of seeds for planting for vegetables and things like that. Some seeds are so small for trees that you can't even see them. Well, you can, of course, because obviously you can use a microscope to do that, but you really do have to go looking for them. Others, they're huge. You can't miss them. Some of them are designed to be eaten. They absolutely have to be absorbed by a body of some sort, usually birds, so that it's dropped elsewhere. And that gets the fertilization process going and all that sort of. Basically, a seed has to go into the ground and stop functioning as a seed and start using up the energy stored in it to make the seed grow again, to start the tree process. All right? Yeah. All right? You'll need to pick this up. Okay, so if it's got to live long enough, then what it has to do is grow and compete with other trees that are also growing. What's it competing for? What's a tree competing for?
Space.
Not space. What does it use to fuel its own processes for? Well, carbon dioxide's in there, but what's the big deal? Do trees grow really well at night? Yeah, it'll open, pull. Yeah. All right, no, sunlight. Okay, so what it's trying to do is get tall enough to compete with the other trees that are also competing for the sunlight. So how does it do that? Grows taller. Exactly. Now, to grow taller, there's a fundamental problem. As you get bigger as a tree, and you put more and more leaves on you to create the fuel you need to grow taller so that you live long enough to make more trees, you start to create situations of loading, either from the actual plants itself, or from the wind, or from the rain, or from other things that are affecting the tree staying in the same place. So it creates anchor points into the ground to help assist in keeping it there, and uses those anchor points to help fuel with water and nutrients and minerals the process of life, with the whole thing geared up to get to a point where it flowers, creates seeds, drops the seeds, or the birds come and eat them, take them away. The wind might take them, carry them downstream or down to another point where another tree will grow up later. And it will then compete with all the other trees around, the ones that grow fastest, the ones that are the strongest, the ones that can withstand the situation it finds itself in. They're the ones that live long enough. It's a competition. All right, one further question to add. Can I get rid of those? So we know a tree is a tree to make more trees, and it has to live long enough, and it has to compete with other trees for that ability to live long enough to make more trees. Next question is, why is it tree-shaped? Tree-shaped. What do you mean by tree-shaped? That's tree-shaped. If I drew that picture and didn't tell you it was a tree, you'd probably go, oh, it's a tree. I can do that with that picture. What kind of tree is that? A pine tree. Well, some people say Christmas tree, all that sort of stuff, pine tree. But you know it from that shape. You know that in there are branches and there are leaves in there. And those leaves are funny because they're actually thin little fiddly bits, not big flat bits. What about something that looks like that? Yeah, so a myrtle, an oak, something like a European tree, big broad tree. All right. What about, well, if I stick with that design there, just stick with that for a second. If I put leaves on it and do this with the leaves, so the leaves in this case are all this sort of shape. You'd say gum tree, yeah, because the leaf gives it away and the way it hangs. Have you seen these sorts of trees anywhere? Or they grow slightly differently. Australian trees hang down. South African trees, they tend to brush out, and you can see that sort of savanna sort of looking thing there. Think African plains or the Lion King cartoons. They look like that, right? Okay, so here's a difference, 4 different types of trees. Something that looks European, big, oaky. Something that's a pine tree, high mountain stuff. Something that's in an area like Australia, dry, sunny, hot. Somewhere dry, sunny and hot. Solution to 2 similar problems. You want sunlight, but you don't want to dry out. So what you do is you make it so that your leaves hang down. You get sunlight in the morning, but in the real hot of the day, when the sun is above you, your leaves are hanging down. They're not drying out. They're not losing water. Well, drying out is losing water. But they're not actually active either. They're not doing a whole lot. But they don't need to, because we're in a country where there's so much sunlight that even the afternoon is going to give you something. African plains one, similar solution. This time though, doesn't get any sun in the mornings, doesn't get any sun in the afternoon, gets it in the middle of the day. Cuts down the time that the sun is concentrating on the leaves by spreading them out. Similar solution, different format. Different species, different arrangement. Very successful. What's this guy's problem?
Lack of light.
Lack of light, yeah. So it has a problem. It doesn't get a lot of light, but well, there's another solution to that problem in a moment, which we'll see with both of these. But it's got a bigger problem than that. It tends to live in cold environments, Yep, so the leaves could freeze, and if the leaves froze, they die, and if they died, they were useless to it, and so you're losing your leaf. If that tree was in that environment, it tends to deliberately get rid of its leaves so that it doesn't lose anything. What it'll do is, these are big broad leaves probably, it will take all the energy out of the leaf, back it back up, send it back into the tree itself, store it, drop the leaves off every autumn, wait until the sun comes back and it warms up, then regenerate the leaf and save all that energy that it's stored and use that for the next growth. These guys solve the problem by making the leaf, rather than big and broad, which would freeze, get the leaf with all the little shoots that are normally on a leaf like that, and get rid of the bits in between. And as it does that, it makes the leaf into a needle-like leaf, which reduces the surface. Well, it doesn't reduce the surface area much. It actually keeps the sunlight availability high, but what it does is stop those areas from being a broad, flat area to freeze in cold weather. It also has a secondary thing, and that is, in cold weather, what do you tend to get onto a tree like this? Snow. So there's a good chance this thing's going to get covered in snow. So that angle tends to be one that supports heavy snow load. Why would that work? If you have a big broad leaf like this, big tree with big branches hanging out and big angles, say this is in the order of maybe 3 or 4 meters, 3 to 4, 5 meters, big open area. These guys are only about 1 or 2 meters wide on either side. So the angles here are steeper inside, which means that the loads get supported in a different way. Fair enough? All right. On this fella, the big arc, sun all the way at all times of the year, maximising it. So in high latitude European countries, you get that sort of feel for it. Lots of little bushes too will go with that arrangement, keep it low to the ground, get the sunlight. All right. Now, where are we leading? Why is it tree shaped? The tree shape and the type of tree will determine the type of timber. In here, in this piece, you can see lines that indicate certain things, and you know them. What are they? Grains. Inside the timber are grains, but those lines. Probably better to see it from the end. I'll draw it again. On the end of a piece of timber, you usually see something like a concentric circle. So on that piece there, what you're seeing is a couple of lines that look like that. And on the length of the timber, it's showing up as lines running down the length of the timber. All right? These indicate something. Do you know what it is?
The age?
Tend to be used for age, but why? Trees are an interesting living organism. A tree, when you look at it and cut through the circle of it straight through the centre, is a series of circles. These are the concentric circles, and they're called growth rings. Growth and rings. And what is happening is that the growing part of the tree, the actual part of the tree that's living, is only a few cells wide just here. It's known as the cambium layer, and it's way out on the end at the edges of the tree. And what's happening there is that cells, known as parenchyma cells, are able to divide and become another type of cell. They can differentiate, and they can determine what they're going to be in the living organism after the breakaway from that point. So you grow new seeds, they duplicate new seeds, new cells, they grow on the outside, and when they grow on the outside, they harden up, solid up, fill up with minerals and other things, and they turn into bark. So on the outside edge, you've got this growing layer, which is like an expanding balloon. So think if you put mud on the outside of a balloon, start to blow it up, the mud is hardened, you start to see cracks in it as it grows, and those cracks get filled with more material, and that grows out and keeps going. Some trees, it'll get so thick that you can cut it off and use it. Cork. Cork is the bark from the outside of certain trees in Spain and Europe. Some trees will get to the point where the bark just cracks off and falls off. Australian trees tend to lose a very thin layer yearly. Some trees, you know, the ghost gums and things like this, will go grey and then turn bright white when the tree's leaves or the bark all falls off. On the other side, on the inside, these cells turn into very important cells when they differentiate out. They can become either a vessel, a container for running fluid up and down the tree for sap, or it becomes a fibre. And a fibre is a supporting element, a thickened up one of them. They just harden up like the bark on the outside to some degree. They get really stiff and hard. If you looked at them side on, so that you're looking at the tree from the side, what you tend to see is a whole bunch of cells, and they run down into the wood and lock into the next guy underneath. And so they're long, thin things that run down. Some are hollow, vessels and pores, which allow fluid to go up and down the tree for the transportation of water, moisture, sugars and starches back down the tree. There are also a bunch of them that actually go inwards too, so that you can store material into the tree away from insects and away from the cold weather. Particularly those trees that are deciduous do this, so that they can keep all that nice chemical stuff they use, chlorophylls, chloroplasts that they're going to use for next year's light use and generation of fuel. And that's stored inside. These are called medullary rays, and you can see those sometimes as they head in. So there's cells, also big cells, that transport into the material and store it away. In one type of timber, you get a dual action cell. So the cell actually functions as both strengthener and as food contact. And those are known as the softwoods, more correctly called conifers, or even more correctly called a gymnosperm, naked seed, gymnosperm. The conifer group, softwood group, they're the ones that have only one real type of cell. They have all these other things going on as well, but generally speaking, when you look at the timber, you see only one type. In the hardwoods, the angiosperms, you tend to get a number of function things. You get really large vessels or pores that do all the food transportation up and down, and then you get a whole range of fibre ones that do the supporting mechanism into the timber. So it's got a different look through the microscope. It's unfortunate they call them hardwood and softwood, because actually that's really not necessarily the case. Most of these are harder because those fibres tend to thicken up and they get really hard to work, so it's difficult. Hardwoods tend to be the woods that are harder to put a nail into, harder to cut, and so on. Softwoods tend to be easier. But one of the softest woods, balsa wood, which you use for model making, is from South America, is actually a hardwood because it has the vessels and the pores and the fibres. So when you look at the way in which the timber is made up, balsa wood is more like a hardwood than it is a softwood. Well, it is a hardwood, and it's also got a different type of seed. It's got a locked seed, an angiosperm, closed up seed. Anyway, those lines that we're talking about there, the ones that you're looking at, growth rings, are seasonal periods of rapid formation of cells, because the fuel's good, the food's good, the water's good, the sun's good, lots of activity. You can grow cells really quickly, and then in the winter time it sort of shuts down, and particularly in the hardwoods that are deciduous hardwoods, the whole factory just closes down for the winter. And so during that time, very little cell division is taking place in the cambium layer, and so it tends to be small and close together, and big and wide apart, and the difference between the two cells is what you see in the timber as those growth rings. Hence the idea of using it to tell how old it is. Do you know the name for what they do when they do that? They can actually date, they use it a lot for dating. It's dendrochronology. It's using the growth rings to do a whole bunch of science with, and they can work out seasons. They can look back and see when bushfires were, how often the fires took place because of the damage to the timber. What was the season like for, if the tree's 80 years old, you can look back 80 years and you can look at the first 5 or 6 years of its life and say, okay, what was the weather like? Summer was good, lots of water, big broad band. Next summer, short, might have been an ordinary summer. No rain, drought. They do that. Some trees are over 400 or 500 years old. Then if you find a piece of wood that was cut down 400 or 500 years ago that is also 400 or 500 years old, you can usually use the first tree to get yourself back to the second tree and overlap the growth rings, and so you can find out weather going back several hundred years. I'm not sure what the depth of that is. It's probably into the thousands now because they've done a lot of research on this stuff. So you can get climate information around the world from the tree rings and dendrochronology it's called. But that's not the important thing for us as engineers. That's just a side thing. The important thing for us as an engineer is that the two problems that we had to begin with, why is a tree and why is it tree shaped, those are the solutions to those two problems create strong supporting beams where all the fibres in the material, trees are really a composite material. They're made up of a lot more than one thing, but they all work together in unison to create the strength of the tree. And then every branch that comes out from the tree is also a supporting mechanism for a load. So the tree has several load conditions for bending, wind, supporting the load, so it's very strong as a column, hence we use it for telegraph poles and beams for holding up buildings. And you know, you can even build the old-fashioned way, you'd build a whole structure out of just using the beams upright, using them in their natural situation. This way is the strongest. This way would be slightly weaker than that way, but it's still pretty strong because the idea, if it was a branch, is that's a cantilever, so it's got to take load outside there too. So timber is a really, really useful building material. And the reason it's a useful building material is it was built to be a strengthening device. To do one thing, hold leaves, to hold flowers, little flower, to grow seeds, to drop seeds, to grow another tree. And that whole process, growing up that tall, to get out to that stage, to get to that stage, to get to that stage, we take advantage of. We come along, we chop it down. Unfortunately, we've done that too uncontrolled in the past, and we've lost a lot of our old growth forests and all that sort of stuff. Yes, I know there's lots of issues there. Conserving trees. Trees are a good renewable resource. We can grow them back. You might just have to wait a long time to get the sort of timbers that are exotic, but the pine and radiata pines, for example, 30-year turnaround, some even less. So you can farm them, you grow a spot you're going to actually harvest this year, and then next year you're going to wait 5 years and you get another one, and then keep going. By the time you've gone around, you come back to the first one you've harvested and they've grown back up again. Really cool process. Another thing about timber is that it's a carbon-based material, like all life really, but this carbon-based material will give you back the carbon very quickly, and all you have to do to get the carbon back out of it is to set fire to it. And then you get heat. The energy of the sun that was produced in making it gets returned to you in another form, a calorific form, which you can stand there and warm yourself against, create food, create fire that you can protect yourself. So for mankind it was a huge advantage to have fire, and timber being a fire thing is a cool thing. Right? So timber becomes a fuel, useful to us for the process of life, for us. So you've got a building material, you've got a material that can be used for other purposes, and here's a third thing that people don't realise about trees these days, is that they're also a good carbon store. Right? Carbon store. What's carbon store all about? Why is carbon storage important? It's open, just pull on it. All right. There you go. Yeah. Carbon store, I don't know which bin it goes in. Just put it in one, it'd be good. Thank you, Jordan. He's always doing something strange. Anyway. Carbon storage. What's that all about these days?
Too much of it now.
Too much in the atmosphere from doing what? Burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, we need to get rid of the carbon, so we could use trees as a kind of, it's not going to be enough. I mean, the honest truth is that the carbon that we're getting from the ground as carbon fuel was originally some form of living organism, particularly a tree, and deposited down and died and then turned into the oil that we then can dig up and burn. So we need to recreate an environment like there was millions of years ago when these trees were prolific and covered all of the planet, and they were dying faster than, well, they were growing faster than they were dying, so that you had these massive deposits of trees. We're not there, we can't do that. But it'll help. And it's a closed circuit. What that means is a closed system circuit means that what we take out of the ground, what we use above the ground stays above the ground, rather than take out of the ground which we can't put back. Yeah. Anyway, so point of the exercise for this one, the short one, timber is a really useful engineering product that you have to get, you have to get your head around from the perspective of why does it look like it does, but it's useful to us. So why is a tree a tree?
To make more trees.
To make more trees, which means it has to be tree shaped, so it can grow long enough and live long enough to make more trees. And to be tree shaped, it has to be strong and supportive. And we come along as engineers and go, we'll have some of that, thank you very much. That works for me as well. All right? Pretty cool?
Yep.
Yeah. As long as you appreciate the timber as an engineering product, later on we'll talk about laminates and how we use different sorts of materials to combine strength for different things. Anyway, that'll do.